Every story leaves something behind: a whisper, a shadow, a question that was never answered. Here, we dig through the forgotten files, the unsolved mysteries, the chilling true crimes, and the horrors people wish had stayed buried. From haunted legends to real-life nightmares, every tale is pulled straight from the horror archives. So turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and step carefully, because once a story enters the horror archives, it never truly leaves.
The first story tonight was sent to me by someone who was a junior in high school when their building went into a real lockdown. What unsettled them most wasn't the lockdown itself. It was a detail that didn't add up afterward. A detail no one could explain. The intercom clicked on, but nobody spoke. Just dead air, a faint hum, and then it clicked off again. That was the first thing that was wrong. This was my junior year at a mid-sized high school in southern Ohio, the kind of building that was built in the 70s and never fully renovated. Drop ceilings with water stains, fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency you could feel in your teeth, and long hallways with no windows except at the very ends. It was a Tuesday in February, gray outside, maybe 30 degrees. Fourth period, AP US History Misses. Callahan's room on the second floor. About 10 minutes after the empty intercom click, the real announcement came. Lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. Misses. Callahan's face changed immediately. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just said, "Okay, you know what to do." And we did. Lights off, door locked, blinds down, everyone to the corner farthest from the door, below the window line. We drilled this dozens of times, but this time the vibe was different. Mrs. Callahan wasn't looking at us. She was looking at her phone, and her hand was shaking. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" She didn't answer. We sat there in the dark for maybe 5 minutes before we heard footsteps in the hallway. Not running, slow, deliberate footsteps. They'd stop outside a door, pause, and then continue. Getting closer. My friend Marcus was next to me, and he grabbed my arm so hard it left a bruise I found later that night. The footsteps stopped outside our door. I could see the shadow of 2 feet in the gap beneath it. Everyone stopped breathing. I don't mean that as an expression. 23 people in that room, and I could not hear a single breath. Then the door handle turned. Slowly, it caught on the lock. There was a pause, and then the handle turned again, harder. The whole door shifted in its frame. Someone in the back of the room let out a tiny sound, like a whimper cut in half. The feet stood there for what felt like a full minute. Then they moved on. Down the hall, we heard the next door handle rattle, and the next one, and the next. We stayed in lockdown for almost 2 hours. When it was finally lifted, they told us it was a precautionary measure based on a credible threat, and that the situation had been resolved. They let us go home early. Buses were lined up outside. Parents were in the parking lot crying. I found out later from a kid whose mom worked in the front office that a man had actually been inside the building. He'd walked in through a side door that was propped open by a janitor's cart. He was not a student. He was not a parent. He had no identification on him. They found him on the 3rd floor, just standing in an empty classroom. The police report apparently said he had a backpack, but they never told us what was in it. What still gets me, is that the footsteps I heard were on the 2nd floor. The man was found on the 3rd floor. The police cleared the building floor by floor starting from the 1st. So whoever was trying our door handles on the 2nd floor, that was supposed to be the police. But police announce themselves. They call out. They identify. Whoever tried our door didn't say a single word. I asked Mrs. Callahan about it a week later. She told me not to worry about it, that everything had been handled, but she wouldn't look at me when she said it. The same way she wouldn't look at us that day. And I noticed something I hadn't before. The lock on our classroom door had been replaced. Brand new hardware, shiny brass on a door full of old scratches. I never found out who tried to open that door. I don't think anyone wants me to. That detail about the lock being replaced, that's the kind of thing that keeps you up at night. But this next story is worse, because in this one, there was no teacher in the room when it started. This story was submitted by someone who was in 8th grade during a lockdown at their middle school in New Jersey. What makes it so disturbing is how close things came to going very differently. all because of one unlocked door. The teacher wasn't in the room when the lockdown started. That's the detail that changed everything. I was in 8th grade at middle school in suburban New Jersey. The building was shaped like a giant H, with 2 long parallel hallways connected by a shorter one in the middle. Room 114 was at the far end of the South Hall, right next to a fire exit that led to over by the baseball field. Our teacher, Mr. Dominic, had stepped out maybe 2 minutes before the announcement to go to the teacher's lounge. He told us to keep working on our worksheets. There were 14 of us in that room. When the lockdown tone came over the speakers, we all just kind of looked at each other. A couple kids laughed nervously, but then we heard yelling from somewhere down the hall. Not screaming, yelling like an adult man's voice. Aggressive but muffled enough that you couldn't make out the words. That killed the laughter instantly. A girl named Priya took charge. She went to the door, locked it, and flipped the lights off. She told everyone to get away from the door and stay quiet. She was calm about it, calmer than any of us. We huddled near the back wall between the teacher's desk and a bookshelf. The yelling got louder. Then it stopped. Then we heard a loud bang, like a door being slammed open against a wall. Then another one. Closer. Someone was going down the hallway, opening doors, not trying handles, forcing them. A kid named Derek said we should go out the fire exit. Priya said no. The alarm would go off and draw attention to us. Derek said he didn't care. He wanted to get out. A few other kids agreed. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there, frozen, watching the argument happen in harsh whispers in the dark. Then the banging stopped, and we heard footsteps, close, right outside our room. And then a voice, a man's voice, not Mr. Dominic's. He said, "It's okay. You can open the door. The lockdown is over." Nobody moved because the lockdown tone hadn't sounded again. When a lockdown ends at our school, you hear the all-clear tone and then the principal's voice. We'd heard neither. The man said it again, softer this time, almost gentle. "Come on, guys. Open up. It's safe." Priya put her finger to her lips. Nobody made a sound. My heart was so loud in my ears, I was sure he could hear it through the door. Then the handle rattled. Not violently, just a test. It held. There was a long pause. I was staring at the thin, vertical window beside the door. It had that wire mesh embedded in the glass, and I saw a shadow pass across it. Just a shape. And then it was gone. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then Derek couldn't take it anymore. He went to the fire exit and pushed it open. The alarm screamed through the building. Everyone panicked. We ran out onto the grass by the baseball field and just kept running until we reached the parking lot where police cars were already lined up. They told us later that a former student's parent had come into the school in some kind of crisis, divorce-related. He was looking for his kid, who wasn't even enrolled there anymore. They said he was unarmed. They said he was just upset. But here's what I never got an answer to. Mr. Dominic never came back to the classroom. During the lockdown, he was found locked inside the teacher's lounge on the other side of the building. He told police he heard the lockdown and sheltered in place. Fine, that makes sense. But room 112, the classroom 2 doors down from ours, was open when police swept the hall. Door wide open, lights still on. The students in that room had been moved to the library earlier that period for a presentation. The room was empty. Room 113 was locked. Room 114, ours, was locked. But room 112 was open, which means whoever was slamming doors open. He got into at least one room. And if we hadn't locked that door when we did, if Mr. Dominic had been there and decided to check the hallway instead of locking down, if we'd listened to that voice, the school sent a letter home calling it a domestic incident that was quickly resolved. They put a security vestibule on the front entrance that summer, but they never did anything about the side doors. I walked past room 112 every day for the rest of that year, and every time I did, I thought about how the door had been open and how the voice outside our door knew to try to sound safe. That voice trying to sound safe, that's something I don't think I'll forget. But this last story is the one that genuinely unsettled me. It was sent by someone who was completely alone during a lockdown, in a room with no lock on the door. This comes from a listener who was a senior at a small high school in rural Kentucky. What happened during those 37 minutes still doesn't have an explanation. I could hear him breathing on the other side of the wall, not moving, not speaking, just standing there breathing. This happened my senior year at a high school in rural eastern Kentucky. Small school, maybe 400 students total. The building was old, built in the 50s, with cinder block walls painted that pale institutional green and tile floors that made every sound carry. I was in the auxiliary gym, which was really just a large storage room attached to the main gymnasium that they'd converted into a wrestling practice space. It had no windows, one door in, one door out, and it was just me. I'd gotten a pass from study hall to work on a makeup fitness test, run laps, do push-ups, that kind of thing. The coach was supposed to be there, but he'd gotten pulled into a meeting. He told me to just do my laps, and he'd sign off on it later. So I was alone in this room at the far end of the building, earbuds in, running circles on the mat. I didn't hear the lockdown announcement. I had music playing, and the auxiliary gym doesn't have its own intercom speaker. The one in the main gym is barely audible through the wall. I only realized something was wrong when I took my earbuds out to get water and noticed how quiet it was. No voices, no sounds from the hallway, no basketball shoes squeaking in the main gym. Nothing. I checked my phone. 3 texts from my friend Jake. The first one said lockdown. The second said not a drill. The third, sent 4 minutes later, said someone has a gun. My stomach dropped so fast I nearly threw up. I turned off the lights and sat down against the far wall. The door to the auxiliary gym didn't have a lock on the inside. It was a push-bar door, like a fire exit, and it could only be locked from the outside with a key. I didn't have a key. Nobody had given me a key, so I did the only thing I could think of. I dragged a wrestling mat against the door. It was heavy, maybe 80 pounds, and I shoved it against the base. Then I took the folding table the coach used for his clipboard and wedged it under the push bar. It wasn't secure. I knew it wasn't secure, but it was something. I sat back down in the dark corner and texted Jake. He said they'd heard what sounded like a loud pop from the east wing. Then the lockdown. He was in the science building on the other side of campus. He was safe. I was in the east wing. I turned my phone brightness all the way down and sat there. That's when I heard the breathing. The wall between the auxiliary gym and the main gym was cinder block, but there was a seam where
And that's where tonight's file closes, but the archives are far from empty. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover more horrors, mysteries, and true crimes hidden in the horror archives. Until next time, keep the lights low, keep listening, because you never know what story we'll uncover next.